Hello everyone, Rob Bertholf here, excited to start on this new series called Advent Leaders. And in this series, one of the first topics is on true education. There's a quote that reads, "Now, as never before, we need to understand the true science of education. And if we fail to understand this, we shall never have a place in the kingdom of God." So this is powerful stuff. True education, we'll find, is salvational. And the short of this is, Jesus has told us that he is the way, the truth, and the life, and that no man cometh unto the Father except through him. So we must be educated in truth. So what is true education? In the book by Ellen White, True Education, she quotes Proverbs 2:6 that the true higher education is that which is imparted by him, out of whose mouth cometh knowledge and understanding. So higher education, true higher education, does not come from the world, it comes from God only, and it comes through the knowledge and understanding of him. To acknowledge the mystery of God and the Father and of Jesus, in whom all are hid the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. So the mystery of God and the treasures of wisdom and knowledge, we must go to the source in order to find that. Higher education only comes from a knowledge of God. All true knowledge and real development have their source in a knowledge of God. We read further that this knowledge is only gained by observing and studying what God has revealed through the physical, mental, and spiritual realms. True education has to do with the whole person. It's not just learning a trade, it's not just reading a book, and it's not just having an understanding of theology. True education is the harmonious development of the physical, the mental, and the spiritual powers. As I paraphrase it, true education is the integration of the head, the heart, and the hand. I highly recommend this book by Ellen White, True Education. In the first chapter, there's this one quote in particular that reads, "The human mind is brought into communion with the mind of God, the finite with the infinite. In this communication is found the highest education." So true education is a way of life. It's a surrender. It's a constant observation of looking at our surroundings, being in nature, and understanding what God's created for us. It's really just, it's looking to God in all aspects. What is the purpose of true education? To restore man in the image of his Maker, and to bring him back into perfection, which he was created to promote the development of the body, the mind, and the soul, that the divine purpose in his creation may be realized. This was to be the work of redemption. This is the object of education, the great object of life. So it's to restore, it's to develop, and it's to realize. Now, we could be restoring the image of God, restoring our focus, our mindset, our mental and physical health, right? We're to develop our mind, body, soul, our character, practical skills like country living, as well as evangelism and outreach. Also to realize our identity, our purpose, and our mission. In terms of these themes, we restore focus, we develop character, and we realize purpose. And this is the foundation of the curriculum that we're using for our True Education leadership training that actually starts this year in March. So let's go through each of these. Restore. We are to restore man back into the image of God. That's what true education is geared for, is at his restoration of us. And now we must remember that God created man in his own image, and that the true object of education is to restore us back into the image of God in our soul. So in the beginning, God created man in his own likeness, and he endowed us with noble qualities, and his mind was well balanced, and all the powers of his being were harmonious. But after the fall, its effects have perverted these gifts. Sin has marred and well-nigh obliterated the image of God in man. This was what must be restored. The moral image of God was almost obliterated by the sin. It was to restore this that the plan of salvation was devised, and a life of probation was granted to man, to bring him back to perfection in which he was first created. This is the great object of life, the object that underlines every other. And it's the work of parents and teachers in the education of the youth to cooperate with the divine purpose, and in so doing, they are laborers together with God. This comes from a wonderful chapter called The School of the Prophets in Christian Education. So to restore the man in the image of his maker is to bring back to the perfection in which he was created, to promote the development of the mind, body, and soul, that the divine purpose in his creation may be realized. This was to be the work of redemption. This is the object of education, the great object of life. In a highest sense, the work of education and the work of redemption are one. So we find out again that powerful, true education is redemption. It's salvation, and we'll continue to see this theme. So, how do we get this redemption? How do we get this reset? And that's what we need. We need an educational reset. We need to change what success looks like in the minds of our youth. We need to change what success looks like in our church, in the way that we look at, what has God called us to do? Where are we to be living? In the cities? What are we to be observing? How are we to be interacting? We need a reset. When the human mind is free from perverting influences, only then can it receive the lessons of Christ. We were shown that a different order of things must be brought in. But it has taken much time to become aware of the changes that should be made in the lines of study in our schools. So we were warned that education needed a reset. Education needed to be changed. And we think back about how that would look like in the Pharisaic times, in Jesus' time. And during this time, no one was regarded as qualified unless he had studied in the rabbinical schools. And so this is why Jesus and John the Baptist had been represented as ignorant, because they had not gone through the rabbinical schools. So those who heard them were astonished of these scriptures, saying, well, they've never been learned. Of men they had not, truly, but of God of heaven was their teacher, and from him they have received the highest kind of wisdom. And so, again, when we think about this desire for parents to send their children to colleges so they can get a piece of paper saying that the world says they're qualified for life. But how sad is that? How sad is it that we're chasing after world standards and we require our children to have a college education when what they need is a true education? Do we want to be seen as ignorant by the world's standards if it means that we can be seen as highly educated by God's? Next, we have in this formula, restore, develop, realize. And so in development, we find that the development needs to be of the mind, the body, and the soul. It needs to be in this harmonious development. The development of the body, we read in Review and Herald that every man, woman, and child should be educated in practical, useful work. All should learn some trade. It may be tent making, it may be some other business, but it should be trained in their powers into some purpose. And God is ready to increase the capabilities of all who educate themselves to industrious habits. And that we are not to be slothful in business, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. Then God will bless all who guard their influence in this respect. So this is the development of the body. We need to be developed in practical, useful work. Since the mind and the soul find expression through the body, both mental and spiritual vigor are in great degree dependent on physical strength and activity. Right? Let's just capture that one more time. That our physical is impacting our mental and spiritual. And so if we don't have that physical foundation, right, how can we then have the levels of mental and spiritual that God desires for us? And that whoever and whatsoever promotes physical health promotes the development of a strong mind and a well-balanced character. So without health, no one can distinctly understand or completely fulfill its obligations to himself or fellow beings, or to his Creator. Therefore, the health should be as faithfully guarded as the character. And we move even further, we find that a knowledge of the physiology and hygiene should be the basis of all educational effort. The education centering the family was that which prevailed in the days of the patriarchs. And for this, schools should be established. God provided the conditions most favorable for the development of character. The people under his direction still pursued the plan of life that he had pointed from the beginning. And so this education needs to start in the family, and yet we've sent our children away. We read again, in Development of the Mind, we read that the mind must be trained and disciplined to wrestle with hard problems and search the divine truth. So we need to understand problem solving. We need to understand, all of these object lessons that Christ has put before us. And these are found in things like gardening, in things like trades, like building. We'll develop the cognitive, requirements necessary in order to truly search for divine truth through works of trade. In the talks next, we have development of the soul. So religion ennobles the soul, purifies the taste, and sanctifies the judgment. It makes the soul a partaker of heavenly purity. And there is a higher training to be attained through a vital connection with God. Let every student take his Bible and place himself in communion with the great teacher. And so these are these three that we need: the mind, the body, and the soul. And we need the development of each of those. And as we understand and remember back to the formula, right, to restore, develop, and realize, once we've restored this focus, once we developed our mind, body, and soul, now we can come to the third, which is to realize. It says here that the divine purpose in his creation might be realized, the work of redemption. This is the great object. This is the object of education, the great object of life. And so, again, it's this idea that we need to understand what our purpose is. It is the work of parents and teachers in education of the youth to cooperate with the divine purpose, and in so doing, they are laborers together with God. And so to be laborers with God in the lens of a teacher is to educate the youth to their purpose. And God's purpose in giving the third angel's message to the world is to prepare a people to stand true to him during the investigative judgment. Now, this is not talked about really enough. We don't really talk about this, but this is the purpose for which we establish and maintain our publishing houses, schools, sanitarium, restaurants, treatment rooms, and factories. This is our purpose: to prepare a people to stand true during the investigative judgment. Right? And this is our purpose in carrying forward every line of work. So everything that we do is going back to this. Everything why we exist, right? And the entire third angel's message, which is the message of righteousness by faith, okay? It's the message to clean up. This is so that we can stand true during the investigative judgment. The first great lesson in all education is to know and understand the will of God. And so when we understand the will of God and what he wants from this final generation, right, that is the first lesson of education. But see how it's all entwined together. A character formed according to the divine likeness is the only treasure that we can take from this world to the next. Those who are under the instruction of Christ in this world will take every divine attainment with them to the heavenly mansions. And in heaven we are continually to improve. How important, then, the development of character in this life. And so when we're thinking about what is it we must realize that our characters must be in alignment. We must be restored back. Right? This is that restoration, right? This is that development. It all comes down to character, but we will never be able to get the character without a harmonious of the mind as well as the body. Character building is the most important work ever entrusted to human beings. And never before was its diligent study so important as it is now. Never was any previous generation called to meet issues so momentous. Never before were young men and young women confronted by the perils so great as confront them today. In the book Studies in Christian Education by E.A. Sutherland, we read, "The object of these studies is to give a better understanding for the reasons of the decline and moral fall in the Protestant denominations at the time of the Midnight Cry in 1844, and to help as Seventh-day Adventists to avoid the mistakes as we approach the loud cry, soon due to the world." So what's interesting here is that when we think about why were the school of prophets created by Samuel, it was to restore the image of God back into the Israelites coming out of Egypt. So why then was this again because out of the midnight cry, those that had just given up, right? And so it was this moral fall and decline of Protestant denominations that this was really to be reinforced. The world was approaching the great day of atonement in the heavenly sanctuary. Again, this is by E.A. Sutherland. In the year 1844. Prior to this date, history records a most remarkable Christian educational movement and religious awakening. The popular churches were rapidly approaching their crucial test, and God knew it was impossible for them to acceptably carry the closing message until they should come in the line of true education, unless they had a clear understanding of the true science of education. And so again, it just underscores the absolute importance of coming back into true education. We are called to be a peculiar people. We are called to stand apart from the world, and yet we send our children into worldly institutions, worldly education centers to get a worldly education. But what is that doing for them? We read, God knew it was impossible for them to acceptably carry the closing message until they should come back in alignment with true education. And this comes back to the whole idea of us needing to demonstrate the character of Christ. So there's going to be more in this series. I just want to leave it here, and we'll pick up in part 2 when we talk about how true education is taught and ultimately understanding true education versus the Babylonian education, and how we can learn about the past through the School of Prophets and others.